All right, good morning, everybody. So this is the last lecture of this course. So there's no classes next week on Monday and Tuesday. So for today, I'm just going to describe what the normal format of the exam is. We can look at some old questions. I'll give you some commentary on it. I imagine we're going to wrap up early. So I guess we'll just finish this off right now. If you've been poking around on OnQ, you will probably have seen that there are a bunch of, under the content section, if you go to, content, you'll find previous exams. And if you look at the list of previous exams, there's like 10 of them or something here, including some relatively new ones. So last winter's is not here. But two of the older winter exams are here. Some of the old exams, so from 2014 through, I don't remember whose this one was. Not mine. So through 2019, these were done by other people. The course was a little bit different back then. In all these older exams, they were 3 hours long. They asked you bash as well on the exam. This year's exam, there's no bash, so it's all C. I think it was supposed to be a 2-hour exam, but I think the exams office made it 3. Is that true? You guys notice if it's a 3-hour exam? Yeah, it's supposed to be a 2-hour exam. So it's going to be a 2-hour exam. You have 3 hours to do it. So the exam, I mean, if you are very confident in your abilities in C, you could wrap this thing up in like 45 minutes or something like that, or less. What else? Yeah, it's all C, right? No bash. So you don't have to remember any bash. I've already tested you on bash on the midterm. I'm not going to ask you it again. What else do I want to say about the end? So if you look back at these old exams, they're about half bash, half C. So a lot of the questions aren't relevant. And I think that this table is also out of date. So over on the right-hand side, these are supposed to be the quote-unquote relevant questions. I don't think that's true anymore. So just go through the old exams, look for the C questions, and decide for yourself if they look familiar to what we've been talking about in the course this year. If they're not, just ignore it, whatever. You have the solutions for all the exams, at least for the relevant questions. I don't remember if it's the entire exam or not. So there's solutions for everything here. So you can see the questions that have been asked in the past. You can see my solutions to them. So when you're studying for this exam, I mean, you should ask yourself, so what did we learn that was new in this course compared to what we did in 121 and 124, right? And so C is basically Java, except its arrays are funny, right? It has structures, it has pointers, and it's got these weird strings, and it has this, we have to do some file handling. Right? And so if you look at my exams, it's not surprising that you see questions related to those. Right? So I guess let's just take a look. So here's the 2023 winter one. So there's usually the way this works is the first question is basically short answer. You can answer the question in one line of code, a few words. Sometimes you're asked for a sentence. You don't need to use full English, right? Just use point form, it's fine. And basically these questions, so if you've been doing the assignments on your own, so you're not asking ChatGPT to do your assignments for you, and you've been following along in the lecture notes and coming to the lectures or at least watching them online, these are supposed to be very straightforward, right? So there's no tricks here really, right? So for example, this one's basically asking, do you know how to get the command line arguments from main, right? That's basically what it's asking. Question B, do you know how to use a pointer? Oh yes, also in C, C has pointers. You have to know how to use pointers, right? So can you create and use a simple pointer, right? So that's B and C, right? Make a pointer, dereference the pointer, right? You would be surprised at how many students can't do these questions, right? All right, so here's a little function, or function declaration, right? It takes in an array of ints, right? It's asking you, and it claims that it returns the maximum value in the array. Array can hold any int values, right? What's wrong with the function? Well, arrays don't know how big they are in C. So there's no way for this function to actually work properly, right? There's no way the function can determine the length of that array. Right? What is a Boolean in C, right? So the one thing I didn't ask you to do on the assignment was create and use a pointer to a function. So that's pretty important in C. So you should expect to see a pointer to a function question. Not a difficult one, right? But you should be able to create a pointer to a function, use a pointer to a function, understand when you need to use one of these things, right? Or where it might be appropriate to use one of these things, right? So a little pointer to a function question, another array question, right? This is basically the equivalence between a pointer and an array. We talked a little bit about manipulating bits, so not surprising if you see a small bit manipulating question. You won't see a big one, right? You're not going to get some programming question where you can only solve it by manipulating bits, right? So there's just a little question about, can you manipulate bits, right? Another pointer type question, another pointer type question. Right. So on this exam, there's 15 of them. There's not always 15 of them, right? There could be fewer or lesser. How many are there in this one? Oh, I don't have the marking table here. Oh, this one's a little bit different. Whose is this one? Oh, this is one of the older. Okay, so this is one of my older ones. So there used to be. This one has a bash programming question on it. You won't see any bash. Somewhere. Okay, I guess this one doesn't have that sort of question on it. So, but you should expect to see a bunch of short answer questions. All right, and then you should expect to see a bunch of short programming questions, and then there will be 1 or 2 medium-sized programming questions. Medium means like 20 lines-ish, right? 20 lines or less than 50 anyway, for sure. This is a structure question. So can you make a structure, right? Can you make a type def? Can you fill in the structure, right? And this one also requires you to do some memory allocation and string handling, right? But it's not difficult, right? So can you allocate a structure? Well, if you know how to use malloc, you can allocate a structure, right? Once you have a pointer to a structure, do you know how to use a pointer to a structure, right? So use the arrow notation. One of the members is a string. So if you want the string in the structure to be independent from the string that's coming in and we're asking you to copy, well, you have to copy the string. Stack question. This looks like a stack question. I mean, the stack question is really, can you manipulate a pointer, right? Because you're going to get you might get some sort of node-based structure. Could be a stack, could be something else, right? Can you follow the sequence of pointers along the stack, right? These data structure questions are also good for the pointer to a function question. Right. This is asking you about the generic stack. So remember, our generic stack doesn't store the elements themselves, right? It stores pointers to the elements, right? When you store the pointers to the elements, you are, well, first of all, you have to work with pointers to elements rather than the elements themselves, right? This is a generic stack, so odds are pretty good that there's going to be some function that the stack can't answer because it doesn't know how to operate on your elements. So you're going to need a pointer to a function of some kind, right? And that's what question 3 is asking you about, right? Again, the answers are all here, right? You can take a look at them, see how they work. And then, right, can you iterate over a sequence of nodes, right? This one also asks you to use a pointer to a function to call a function. One of the longer programming questions on this particular exam has you implement string compare, right? So remember, it tells you what string compare does if you forget what it does, right? It's basically the C equivalent to compare to for strings, right? And so can you walk along a string and compare the two strings for order, right? I even tell you, so I guess one of the questions that you might have is, well, how do I compare two characters for order, right? It even tells you, hey, don't forget characters are just numbers, right? So you can compare them directly by value using less than or greater than, right? And so now you just walk along the strings. There are some special cases you have to watch out for, right? But other than that, the problem is not terribly difficult, right? But it does require you to know how to walk along a string, how to find the length of a string, and so on and so on and so forth. This one, this solution uses the obvious solution, right? It uses string length to compute the length of the string. There's no reason you have to do it this way, right? A good exam question would be to give you this and then ask you to convert it to a version that doesn't use string length, right? So for example, without actually using string length, or so without explicitly calculating the length of the string, re-implement the function, right? So now you just walk the pointers along until you hit the null terminator. And so you need to remember, hey, every string has a null terminator at the end. This one, how does this one work? Oh yes, so this one completely avoids all pointer manipulation in the solution, right? It also tells you that does it ask you what it returns? No, it doesn't tell you what it returns. Another good variation of this question would be something along the lines of it returns the difference in the two characters, right? So if the two strings are not equal, and then return a value that encodes some information about how they're different, right? Okay, and then the last programming question on this one. So there hasn't been a file handling question on this one. You can probably guess there's going to be a file handling question somewhere, right? So last question here, write a C program having a main function, requires one command line argument, which is a file, right? You're going to read in a file, the file looks like this, right? It's just a number followed by a comma followed by a string. The number tells you how long the string is, right? Why does it tell you how long the string is? So that when you try to read that into a buffer, you know how big the buffer has to be, right? That's why it tells you how long the string is, right? It marks the end of the file with a special number. Why does it mark the end of the file with a special number? So you know when to stop, right? It doesn't tell you how many strings are in the file though, and it also says you don't know how long these strings might be, right? So there's going to be some sort of dynamic memory allocation going on here. Right, you'll need to allocate memory for the strings on each line, right? Because you don't know how long they are ahead of time, right? When you're reading the file, you know how long they are, right? And similarly, you don't know how many lines in the file there are. So you have to pick some strategy that figures out how many lines am I going to read in, right? So what are your strategies that are available to you? You can read the file in, count the number of new lines in the file until you find the 0. Right, now you know how many lines there are in the file. The other strategy is to reallocate memory as needed as you read in the file. Right, and so we saw examples of those earlier this week. This one also asks you to concatenate the strings into one big string. Right, so we want to print out supercalifragilisticexpialidocious at the end of this. Right. Solution is not terribly long, right? So if you find yourself writing pages and pages and pages of code, something's gone wrong, right? None of the questions should require more than, well, this is a page, so this is probably like 25 or 30 lines of code, right? With all of the error handling in it. So what strategy did I use here? Oh, read the file once to compute the total string length. Oh, so yes, that's the other issue here. You need to concatenate that string into a big string. So you need to sum these values to figure out the length of the final string, right? And so my strategy here, read the file once to compute the total string length, right? So read the file. How am I doing this? fscanf. Oh yes. This was a particularly nice question if you realized how to do it. So if you remember that there is a way to read formatted data from a file, fscanf, right? You can simply read in the number at the front of each line, right? And then skip the rest of the line. So I use fscanf to read in the number at the front of the line, right? And then inside the loop, as I'm reading in the as I'm reading in values from the file, I'm just consuming the rest of the line here. Here. I'm consuming the rest of the line with a character-based loop. Right? So read in the number, eat the rest of the line, sum up the numbers, and then that tells you the total length of the string at the end of it. Right? How do you read in the strings? Well, you just go back and rewind. How did I do this here? Am I doing realloc? String, oh no, so okay. There's multiple strategies for reading in each individual string. Right? So as you go along, as you're sucking in these numbers, you can also keep track of the maximum value, right? And that lets you determine the maximum line length, right? Once you have the maximum line length, you can just allocate one array for each individual. You can allocate a single array that can hold any line, right? Read in the string using fscanf. I hope. Did I do it that way? Yes, I use fscanf to read in the string, right? So read in the string, store the string in your one-line buffer, copy your one-line buffer into the end of your big string that you're concatenating everything into, and away you go. That would be one way to do it. How am I doing it here? Instead of using, so the way I'm doing it here is I'm using fscanf to read each individual string into the final concatenated string. So I don't even have to concatenate this thing at the end, right? I'm going to read in the first string, stick it at the front of the buffer, right? Because I made a buffer big enough to hold the entire string. Read in the second string, store it at the end of the buffer, so where you left off at the previous step, right? And so on and so on and so on and so forth. So that's yet another way to solve this problem, right? There's many ways to solve the problem. I don't care how good or bad your solution is, as long as it works, right? And so there's an example of a longer question that requires some file handling. I think the question last year was easier than this one. Was a little easier than this one. And the question here I think is probably harder than this one. But they're all of this. They all have similar ideas. Right? So this is from 2020, fall 2024. It looks like. Is that true? Can't be true. I think it's this one. 2023. Oh yeah, this is labeled wrong. Okay. I think I even recycled question 5. All right, here's the longer question in this exam. So this one wants you to write a function that reads some strings from a file, right? And it gives you some information here, right? Unspecified. So again, unspecified number of lines, right? So whenever you see that sort of thing, just remember that you're going to have to deal with the fact that this file could have an arbitrary number of lines somehow, right? Each line is a string. The function should read each line of the file, store each line in an array. The contents of the first line should be stored. Oh, so it wants you to read it into this array up here, right? So you're given an array of string, right? Well, I guess you're given an array of pointer to car, right? So you want to store the strings in this array. You're also told that each element of the array is long enough to hold any string in the file. So you don't even have to reallocate memory here. The function should return the number of lines read from the file. Okay, so this is one of the ones where you have to figure out how many lines are in the file. Right. And it also tells you if there's more than 100, so this array here can only hold 100 strings. So it then says, look, if there's more than 100 lines in the file, only read the first 100 lines. Where's the answer to this one? Here. Okay. So there are some comments in the answer, right? Question says the file is readable, so you don't even have to do any error handling here, right? It tells you, hey, you know how long you're guaranteed to be able to read each line of the file into this array. So you don't even care about checking whether or not there's enough memory or enough space to hold each string. So just use fscanf to suck in each line, right? Because you don't have to worry about how long the line is, right? It tells you that you should only read in the first 100 lines, right? So this loop here runs at most 100 times, right? It breaks if fscanf fails, right? So if fscanf can't read in a line, it returns 0, so you break out of the loop, right? Keep track of how many lines you're counting. So if you hit 100, you know that there's more lines in the file, right? So now just read in the rest of the file so that you can return the number of lines, right? Keeping track of the count each time, right? Here you don't have an array to read stuff into now, so you can't. You have to switch from using fscanf or fgets to a character-based loop, right? And so don't forget to close the file, right? Because this is a function. This is not the main function, right? So in the main function, you don't always have to close the files because main will close it for you when it quits, right? But inside any other regular function, you probably want to close the file when you're done with it. So don't forget to do that. Next question. This question is basically implement selection sort. Okay, next question. Write another function that finds the shortest string in the array S. Right, so find the shortest string in the array that you just read in. Move the shortest string to the front of the array. Right. I guess the only tricky part in this question is that you have to remember that strings are just pointers to car. Right, so all you have to do is swap the 2 pointers. So find the shortest string, swap the 2 pointers in the array, and you're done. If you wanted to, you can do a copy. Right, that's also fine because you know that the every element of the array is long enough to hold the longest string. So no problem there. Right, so find the shortest element in the array. Right, so I'm going to look at the first element in the array. Also remember, right, in C, arrays always have length, the shortest array is of length 1. There's no length of 0 arrays, so you can always safely look at the first element in an array. And then look at the rest of the strings, right, computing the length of each string as you go. Right, how do you compute the length of a string? Well, there's this handy string length function. Right. Once you get to the end of the array, once you found the smallest element, you just have to swap the 2 values. Right. You have to remember that strings are arrays. Are pointers to car, right? So my first string is called temp, right? It's the element at index 0, right? The shortest string is at that index there. Do your swap here, away you go. Right. If you wanted to, you could do string copy instead. That would be fine. The next question is cute. Sort by length. Okay, so this sort by length sorts the array of strings in increasing string length. Oh wait, shortest to, yes, using the shortest to front function. Right, so remember you just wrote a function called shortest to front, right? This question is now asking you to sort the rest of the array, right? Notice it's only worth 2 points because this is going to confuse a lot of students, right? There is a hint here though, that tells you how to solve the problem, right? And so if you remember your 121, this is basically selection sort, right? Find the shortest element in the array, move it to the front. Process the rest of the array, right? So find the shortest element starting at the second element to the end of the array, move it to the front of that array, right? So you can just call shortest to front n minus 1 times, right? Tells you don't even have to answer 6b to answer this question. So the answer is very short. Right, so you're going to write a little that runs n minus 1 times, right? Move the shortest element to the front. So shortest to front works by n is where you want to, what is n again? Sorry, n is the number of elements in the array, right? So n is the number of elements in the array, right? So you want to move, first time through the loop, you want to move the smallest element in all n elements of the array to the front. Second time through the loop, you want to move the smallest element in n minus 1 remaining elements in the array, and then n minus 2, and so on and so on and so forth. Right, so that's n minus I. Right, and now the next tricky part is, or the only tricky part in this question is, where is the front of the array? Right, and so just using a little bit of pointer arithmetic, right? You can advance. You can tell shortest front. You want to sort. You want to move the smallest element, not from the front of the array, but from some other location in the array, right? So you need a pointer to that location. That's just s plus I, right? Or the address of si, either one, right? And shockingly, that actually solves the problem. Right? You could also do it recursively if you really wanted to, right? That would also be another possible way to answer the question. And then finally, write a main function that requires 1 command line argument, which is a file name, and basically it sorts the file, right? So you've got all the functions you need to sort the file. So you need somewhere to hold all of your strings, right? Because your first function needs an array of string. Oh, sorry. right? You need to know how long each string is, but the question tells you each string is less than 100. Sorry, file has fewer than 100 lines. Each string has less than 100 characters in it, right? So you need to allocate an array, and then you need to allocate each string in the, or an array for each string in the array. And so that's what that loop is doing there, right? Now you just read in the file. Well, you gotta, right, question 6a had you read in the file, so just use that function, right? Sort the file. 6c had you sort the file, right? Print the lines in sorted order. Okay, so write a little loop that prints each line, right? Now clean up. So remember, you had to allocate each string, so now you have to deallocate each string. So there's another little loop, loops over the array, frees each string, right? And then finally, free the overall array here, right? And so and that wraps up that exam, more or less, right? The other, I don't think, yeah, so all these other questions are written by other people. They're going to be different, a little bit different than the way I ask questions, but the content of the question is all relevant, right? So anything that's C-related, well, almost anything that's C-related is probably relevant in some way to this course. So they are worth looking at if you have time to study from them. I don't know, I haven't checked ExamBank to see if the 2024 winter exam is there or not. If it's there, well, if it's there, it's worth taking a look at. You won't have the solutions to it, but again, it's worth looking at it. Anything else that I want to mention? Anybody have any questions about what else might show up on the exam? Anybody? All right. Oh, yes.
So you're going to give us a sheet of some stuff?
Oh, yeah. So these old exams, they all have the sheets attached to them. And there's also a sample. So here, fall 2020. Oh, so I just copied this from fall 2020. It's not the correct one. So there's something that tells you, that summarizes the useful functions, or functions that you might find useful for the exam, right? So yeah, there is a summary sheet. Yes?
Will we be asked to use the file opening most other than read and write and append?
Probably not. So that fseek, ftell, and the only way you'd be asked to do that sort of thing is if I actually told you what they all did. So if I ask you to do that, I'll tell you what ftell does, I'll tell you what fseek does, right? Otherwise, that's not really worth committing to memory for the purposes of exam. It's also not academically interesting, I don't think. But anyway, you might see a question like that, right? Anything else? Anything else? Right. All right. So in summary, make sure you know how to use a pointer. Make sure you know how to use a pointer to a function, right? Make sure you know how to create a pointer to a function. Make sure you understand how to use arrays, right? Arrays in C are quite different than the arrays that you used in Java, and they're very different from anything you did in Python. Make sure you know how to dynamically allocate memory, how to free memory that you've dynamically allocated, understand how to open a file, read the contents of a file. When you're reading a file, it's worth your while to understand how to read in a file character by character, fgetc, how to do it line-based, so either fgets, or how to read in formatted data, so scanf, right? If you're asked to write to a file, it's useful to know fprintf, right? So how to write formatted data to a file, and fputs, right? How to write a string. I guess it might be useful to learn how to know how to use what's the one for characters? I don't remember, fputc, to put a character to a file. Because we did talk a fair bit about that on Monday and Tuesday this week, right? So there were a lot of examples of implementing or of doing file reading and writing operations earlier this week. It wouldn't be surprising if you saw a question that was similar to one of the ones we covered earlier this week. Anything else? Yes?
Just making sure, on the Jupyter notebook,
yeah.
What's the last C topic? Is it input and output?
It's whatever is the last notebook that's there.
Yeah, I don't know if mine's updating properly, so.
I'm not sure. Start here. Input, output, yes. Yeah. So there were, I mean, Monday and Tuesday, there wasn't a corresponding notebook, right, this week. So I will put those lecture recordings up. I'll also put the source code, the code that I showed you for those on NonQ so that you have access to them. Yes?
Will we know those lectures for the exam?
Yeah, well, I mean, those, well, you need to know. So what do you mean by do you need to know? So you need to know the techniques that were used. Yeah, but you don't, I wouldn't memorize the answer to those particular problems, right? It's the techniques that are used there that are important. Okay. Any other questions? All right. We're done for this year as far as the lectures go. I will update OnQ with information about office hours during the exam period. I am away for a few days. I have to go see my mom. I haven't seen her in a long time. So I have to go visit mom. So I'm going to be away for a few days, but I will let you know on OnQ when my office hours are if you need to see me. If you haven't picked up your midterm, just drop by my office. I'm going to leave them outside my office door in a box later today or tomorrow. All right. We're all done. I will see you either during office hours or at the exam.